Hey guys, it's Ali. Welcome back to Infertile, the podcast. This is episode 252 called Melissa Nath. This episode is supported by Receptiva DX. Getting pregnant isn't always easy, as so many of you listening know. Many couples struggle with infertility, and unexplained infertility can be particularly frustrating. Receptiva DX is the only test that can identify endometriosis, progesterone resistance, and endometritis in a single sample, all causes for unexplained infertility and the success rates of IVF treatments. Receptiva DX includes BCL6, a marker that identifies uterine inflammation, most often associated with asymptomatic, aka silent, endometriosis. BCL6 is found in more than 50% of women with unexplained infertility and over 65% of women with 2 or more IVF failures. If positive for the Receptiva DX test, treatment options can improve the chances for a successful live birth 5-fold. Learn more at receptivadx.com or download their app, which is also called Receptiva DX. And for $75 off, you can go to their website, order the test, and use code InfertileAF23. Again, it's receptivadx.com. Use code InfertileAF23. Thanks, Receptiva DX. This episode is sponsored by SMOO. Life is busy, and keeping up with all of your daily vitamins can be exhausting. SMOO is here to simplify your health routine. SMOO's best-selling hormone balance powder is formulated with 7 essential vitamins, minerals, and herbs that are all highly recommended for hormone balance, fertility, and PCOS. Now is the perfect time to give it a try with an exclusive early holiday offer just for Infertile AF podcast listeners. Enjoy a generous 10% off site-wide using the code INFERTILEAF at checkout. So go to the SMOOCO, which is THESMOOCO.com, and use code INFERTILEAF and you'll get 10% off site-wide. Again, it's the SMOOCO, THESMOOCO.com, and use code INFERTILEAF for 10% off site-wide. Take a step towards a healthier, more balanced you today and try SMOO. Thanks, SMOO. All right, guys. So a dear friend of mine is on today's show. Her name is Melissa Nath, and I met her when she joined Fertility Rally a couple of years ago. She has been a constant presence at our Wednesday night meetings that Blair and I host every Wednesday night. She comes to some of the Sunday meetings that our girl Sonia hosts. We call her the resident nurse and also the social chair of Fertility Rally because she is just constantly helping people, answering questions, and also connecting people and doing all these IRL get-togethers. She's out on the West Coast, so she's always posting pictures of other Rally members that she's gotten together with and other people in this community. So it's a beautiful thing. But today we are going to tell her story. And we're going to start with how Melissa met her husband, Darrell. And then we're going to talk all about their fertility journey from when they first started and when they started doing IUIs to where they are now. So I don't want to give away the ending, but there is a good ending. And Melissa is in a really good place right now with her family building journey. But it has been a long road. Like I said, she's been on so many Fertility Rally calls and she has been doing all the things for years, but we're going to touch on a lot of things that she's been through. We're going to talk about her doing the Emma and the Alice and the Receptiva DX test. And then we're going to talk about, like I said, where she is now. So without further ado, this is Melissa's infertility story. Hi, my love, Melissa. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm so glad we're finally doing this. We've been trying to line it up, and you are one of our OG Fertility Rally members and a dear friend, and I adore you, and so does Blair. So happy you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here and share my story as well.
Yes. So I've seen you in so many meetings over the last, when did you join Fertility Rally? Do you know how long it's been now?
It was either the end of, it was September 2021 because it was when it opened back up the next time. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I've known you for a couple of years now and have been following your story, but I want to hear it in your own words. So tell me, I always like to start by asking, did you always want to be a mom?
I always kind of was like, if it happens, it happens. And then I was in the relationships that were like not the right one. Like, I'm really glad I didn't have children with my ex-husband
Hmm.
because I see what has to happen with his children now through his family, right? So, like, his 80-year-old parents are raising one of them. So,
Mm.
glad that I didn't. And then when I met my husband, he was like, I want 4 kids. And I was like 34 at the time. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that. So
Okay.
we kind
So this is Darrell.
yes,
Tell me
Darrell.
how you guys met?
So we met, actually, his cousins were my neighbors back in 2009. At that time, he was only 20 years old. So he was
Hmm.
a little young,
Hmm.
immature maybe a bit, but we just met like at a house party. And then we lost touch because they moved. And even though I still saw them, I didn't see him and like his sister and extended family as often. And 3 years later, I was going through a breakup and went out with his cousins again for a night out. And he came, and that's where we met. And here
Yeah,
it is, all history, 12 years later,
exactly. Okay.
or
So
11.
fast forwarding a whole bunch, when did you and Darrell know that you were going to be together? And when did you guys start talking about family building and what that looked like for you?
I think for him, it was probably fairly quickly that, like, this is it, because he had never introduced somebody to his family before. And so I think it was probably a few months in that I was like, okay, he's the right one. Like, his mom's his best friend and all of that. Family wise, we just kind of continued to say whatever happens, even though as I was getting older, it was more of a, we probably should think more about this. And so I think it was 5 years ago now that we kind of started saying maybe we should start really thinking about it.
Hmm.
So,
So,
yeah.
what did you know about your fertility growing up? Like, did you know that as you got older, it was going to be harder and all that stuff? And the reason I ask is because I know you've listened to the show before. I really didn't know much about that. And I'm kind of embarrassed how clueless I was. But what did you know?
Well, I knew that it would be harder, just I think from my background, right?
Oh,
My
that's
nursing.
right. We should tell everybody what you do.
I'm a nurse. And I think just knowing that from those days of going through my training for family birth and maternal health, the two semesters, that's all we got. That at 35 you see a decline, and so I was already struggling to be like, there's no way we're having 4 kids. But then as I learned more about kind of IVF being out there and stuff like that, I knew that it was definitely going to be a lot harder. So, yeah.
Hmm. Okay. So, had you had any like fertility, not like issues, but anything going on with you physically that you knew that you might have a hard time as you started to try as you got older?
Yes. So I didn't think about this as a teenager, but I did struggle with ovarian cysts. And then in my early 20s, maybe it was stress related, who knows, but I had very irregular periods to the point that they actually put me on Provera for quite a few months to get me regulated, and then birth control. And then in my early 30s, I started having breakthrough bleeding between cycles. And turns out my lining wasn't building up. So I kind of always was like, well, maybe I'm not going to be able to have kids or carry a child because my lining won't grow. Right.
Hmm.
But that's never been a problem for me now.
Okay.
My not the problem. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So tell me what happened when you guys started to actually try and like what was that, what were the details of all of that?
Yeah. So I've been through quite a few OBGYNs in the last few years. My one, he helped me get regulated again and get my lining to grow. He was around for a long time and never really asked, just kept putting me on birth control because I was like, oh, I'm not really ready. But then we kind of just stopped using it, because we're like, oh, we're going to be together. We don't need it. If it happens, it happens. It's meant to be. And that was fair. Like I said, a few months in, I was kind of like, this is the one. So, 10, almost 11 years ago.
Hmm.
But then I got a new provider for my next follow up, and she put me down as trying to conceive, but never did any blood work, never checked anything. She's just like, you're regular, you're good to go, not looking at my history. The next year, when it was time to really be like, okay, we need to buckle down. We've been kind of tracking and doing this. Let's go for a preconception consult, and that provider also was like, well, I have a friend who's 42 and got pregnant naturally, and you're regular, so we'll just check his semen and see where he's at and go from there, because that's the easiest thing to do. Okay, I'm 40. I'm 40, 41, okay, and still not talking about checking anything on me. So we found out at that time he himself had low sperm count and 0% motility. So like those guys were never going to do anything for us.
Okay. So what was the recommendation? Was it straight out of the gate, like donor, or like, what did they say?
No, we went to a urologist, and
Okay.
he, a fertility urologist here locally, who's now retired, unfortunately. So there's not really any left in the area. He recommended Clomid. So he went on Clomid for, I think it was a month, and then they rechecked again, and it didn't make much of a difference.
Okay.
There was some, not motility, morphology.
Okay.
They swim, they aren't shaped right.
Right.
The morphology improved, but his sperm count really didn't. He also was changes, diet wise, right? Like slow down on your drinking, or quit drinking those energy drinks, or those kinds of things. So,
and was he cool with making those lifestyle changes?
He actually has, he doesn't stop so much the energy drinks. He does do 1 or 2 of those a day still. But he also works very long hours. So enough sleep. Like I woke him up this morning and was like, can you bring me a shoe? Because I put on 2 separate Crocs.
We'll get into that a little bit later, and that will
why that happened.
Yes, that will make a little bit more sense down the road. For some foreshadowing there.
So anyway, he has made changes. He tries to eat better. He eats more of the vegetables that I make than the meat and potatoes and rice. Right, that's just kind of his growing up, right? Because he's Indian, and we haven't said that part. So he's Indian, so rice and meat was all kind of his thing. So. And the drinking, he only does a couple cans on the weekend now. Yeah, he did make changes.
Okay.
Actually, yes, everything else.
And what about you guys, like as a couple, like as you're going through this and, trying to, going through all this testing and figuring it all out, was it hard on you guys?
I think so. I think he struggled with that because it's kind of a manhood thing, right? Like my sperm don't work, or, but he known had we not decided to try. And so I think that was the biggest struggle. Otherwise, we're pretty strong with each other and just kind of support. He's not a big talker, so I really have to push him to talk about things, but he finally will and break down and talk about it. And he just is like, part of it's my fault. He knows that. And he took the medicine, though he hates taking medication. So yeah. He's been such a supportive person for this whole thing. So
that's awesome. I know he seems like such a great guy. Just everything you've told me about him over the last couple of years that we've been getting to know you. So what happened next?
Well, we decided, because they're like, try the 6 months, even though we'd been without anything for years. And so we followed that. And then I got a letter from that clinic that they were closing.
Okay.
Get a new provider. Well, I was with a different clinic than is with the hospital system I work for. So I decided I would look for one within the hospital system for convenience, partly because I could just walk downstairs and go see them. And I chose the one that she was into advanced maternal age, pregnancy, had an interest in fertility, was highly recommended. And so it was 6-7 months actually by the time I got in to see her. And she finally tested my AMH.
Okay.
AMH was great. At 41, almost 42, it was 2.3.
Okay.
So it was AMH, wasn't my FSH, wasn't my estrogen. Everything was really good.
Okay.
She was sure I was ovulating well. So we went on letrozole.
So you went on letrozole and then COVID times, right?
Yeah. So I did 1 month of the lower dose of letrozole. She didn't like my progesterone level at that point. So then we increased it again. And one more time, I think we had to do 3 cycles before we got to the dose that she liked. And then she made me stay on that for 6 months. She said, I don't usually transition you over to fertility care until 6 months because I need to see if it's actually doing what it should do. So I said, okay, I kind of pushed a little harder and said, can we at least do a HSG before you do that? So August of 2020, I did an HSG and everything was fine. Like my tubes were completely open. So, and then in October, she finally, September, she wrote the referral. In October, we finally got into the clinic.
Okay. So when you were doing the letrozole, did you have any how did that affect you?
Oh my gosh. So I struggle with anxiety, and that did not help because here you've got this new disease out there with all these symptoms, and then allergy and COVID and letrozole, and they all have the same symptoms. So like
oh my
10
God.
days out of the month, I would feel like I'm like, oh God, do I have COVID? Like I'm achy and I'm shaky and I'm hot and my nose is stuffed up and all this stuff. And so month I just felt like crap. I felt like I was sick.
And then when you guys got the referral and you went in to see somebody, what happened then?
So, well, she reviewed my labs and his labs. And then really she kind of left it up to us what we wanted to do. And I think a lot of doctors do that. And we didn't know any better at the time. So we chose IUI because, well, we're like, that I'd already researched that's the cheapest. Maybe it'll work if we can just get the sperm in the right spot. So November 2020, we did our first IUI, all the baseline work. That's also when they found my dad's cancer without diagnosing him with colon cancer. So right around the same time. So here I'm going to treatments trying not to tell him what we're doing.
Right.
Because we didn't want that pressure. My mom had been pressuring me for years to have kids. So we didn't want that pressure. So we kept it to ourselves as long as we could.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
First IUI didn't work. We went back in December, did another one. That provider, yeah, he was like, his sperm count's only 2 million. It's not really where we want it to be, but we'll just get the semen as close as possible to the fallopian tube. And I was like, oh, hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have been like, let's cancel and save my money.
Yeah. As a nurse, did you feel like you had like an inner like knowledge of like what like being like, whoa, like maybe we shouldn't do that or like?
But I'm a researcher. And before as soon as I went on letrozole, I started listening to all the podcasts, right? Like everything and reading. So I kind of had an idea of just because of my researching, but not because of intuition from nursing that maybe that's not the right number.
Okay.
So I think that's because we don't talk about what's a normal sperm count until we get to that point. So
right, exactly. So what do you know now about sperm that you wish you knew then?
One, right, that 2 million probably was not a good number to try and do an IUI when you have morphology issues as well. Two, just having him make lifestyle changes sooner. I think that would have probably been a good thing to know, right? So that maybe he could have been ahead of the game before we found out. Because here we are at that point, 15 months in or so from treatment for him of Clomid. So, yeah. So
and how was he sorry to interrupt, how is he doing on the Clomid?
Oh, he was moody a little bit at first. I don't know if he had a lot of the I don't recall. I think at one time he had mentioned maybe some breast tenderness, but some moodiness, and he was exhausted. I don't think it gives him the same symptoms it does women, because I know a lot of women say it's the devil drug.
Yeah, Clomid crazies.
Yeah, no, I'm going to say it's letrozole. Because that's what I took.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he had some moodiness is mostly what he had, and maybe some hot.
Okay. All right. So what happened next in your story?
So we did an IUI in January that failed February, and then March. And at that point, February, they're like, doctor wants to meet with you, but she's like very popular. And so she was booked out until sometime in April of 2021. So I was like, well, so you're not going to put me reorder my letrozole, because they chose to just say, okay, no medications. I'm like, but what if we try at home? Well, you're not being monitored. So they didn't want me to do that because, that potential of extra follicles releasing. So I said, well, let's just do another IUI while we're waiting. I know it's a crapshoot, but let's try it. And so we did. And again, nothing, which was what we expected. But at least we felt like we were doing something while we were just waiting.
Exactly.
So
But going
yeah,
like back to back IUIs, was that taking a toll on you guys again, back to the relationship and just how you were feeling mentally and like what was going on around you? Or like all your friends having babies and getting pregnant, no problems? Or like, how was it like outside
no,
of the treatment, blinders?
yeah. I don't. I think because my friends are a little older, most of them, right? Except for in the community, I was not in the community at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wasn't seeing all these friends get pregnant, maybe some coworkers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're younger. But for him and I don't think it was, I think we just didn't have high expectations because we had been trying so much. It's hard to say, get that big fat negative for a beta.
Mm-hmm.
I try a few times, but he was just like, well, we'll just try again next month. He always tries to be positive about
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he just kept supporting me and letting me cry when I
Oh,
did it. Yeah. And of course, friends didn't know we were going through this.
right.
So
Did you
yeah,
feel like aside from Darrell, you didn't really have anybody to talk to at this point about it? Or like how was that piece of it?
absolutely. I'd only told one friend and we've been friends for over 30 years. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, I told her what we were going through. And most of the reason for that was because I knew I was going to get phone calls when we were on vacation, the two of us to Phoenix, because I was had just joined the clinic. So I was like, I got to do all this paperwork and explain to her what was going on. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but she didn't really bother me and say, what are you doing this month? Or, she just kind of has let me come to her with things as we've gone through this journey. So April, we had our WTF appointment. And that's when our doctor was like, okay, it's time to move on to IVF if you really want to have a child that bad. And she was upfront with me with age, because at this time I'm, 42, almost 43, that donor was probably the best option. Just, the potential of quality of egg. And so the potential to make blastocysts, she's very data driven. So she's giving me all the numbers, and I'm a data driven person. I mean, that's what I've done for a long time. So I understood, and it gave me those expectations to not set myself super high. When we did decide to, we took a few days to do our own IVF, but we had to figure out how to pay for that first because we weren't saving for IVF. Nobody's saving for it.
Right. And you didn't
So
have
that's
anything, none of this was covered, right, Melissa?
correct.
Yeah.
Well, that's not completely true. So no, the treatments themselves were not covered, but and I didn't know this when I went through the IUI. The letrozole was covered in the Clomid, but my trigger shots would have been covered. I didn't know this
Okay.
because I have specialty pharmacy benefits. So, and that was thanks to my grandmother saying, "Hey, you should check that because she has pulmonary fibrosis and used her specialty pharmacy to get this medication. It's extremely
Okay.
expensive."
So you had those through
So,
your employer, but you just didn't know about it? Is that what you mean?
correct.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. So something to look
So
out for people who are listening. Look into that,
look at your pharmacy benefits because people don't think about that. Like
Mm-hmm.
we think only, but as you know, those medications can really rack up
Oh
if
my
you have to.
God. Yes. Okay.
So we sat down and chatted about it for a while, and I got on my little Google, Pinterest to figure out ways to fundraise, right?
Right.
And decided on the puzzle, and where you have individuals donate so many dollars per piece,
I love
and then
that.
we're gonna hang it up in the room, whenever that happens, and it's gonna be a floating frame, and all the names are on the back of it. So we
I
decided
love
then,
that idea.
yeah, it's really fun. So we decided to do that, and before talking to anybody about it, we went and talked to my parents and told them what we were planning to do, and his parents. That way they didn't get blindsided when we posted this like on all of social media, like, that we're fundraising.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and then people just started calling and being like, why haven't you told me you were going through all of this? And I'm like, because it's private, it's personal, but now we kind of need your help.
Uh-huh.
So it was well received. I actually had a couple friends that sell different things like, Scentsy and nail things and other things that did host parties for me and gave me their commissions as well.
Uh-huh.
And that's how I got into Scentsy, to make a little extra to pay for some of these treatments. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
pay a little bit.
So
So
great.
after we talked to everybody, my mom suggested calling my grandmother, because my grandmother did very well with investments as a
Mm-hmm.
young adult and everything. My mom's, she's an only child. So she's like, it's just coming out of my inheritance. Call her and see if she can help. And so she paid for our first round completely, other than our meds.
Mm-hmm.
And so July, we did our first round, which is interesting, right? To be like, I got to go to an appointment. But my coworker knew what I was doing. So I'm like, I got to go and get this checked out and get through all these meds in the middle of summer.
Right.
the,
Exactly.
the
That's
hot
fun.
flashes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that first cycle, every time I've pretty much had like 11 or 12 follicles. That's just kind of where I was sitting, because my AMH had dropped, of course, because it had been a year and a half. So we got, what did we get? We got 7 eggs. That's all they got out of the follicles, which was quite disappointing, right? Like, I'm leaving in there saying that whole thing of, you just need one, you just need one. It only takes
Right.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, thanks. I don't want to hear that when I know that 7 could be 0 tomorrow.
Right. Because
Yeah, because of that attrition rate. So we got the call the next day that only 3 had fertilized. Or no, 3 were mature and only 2 had fertilized.
Mm-hmm. How did that feel to get that news?
It was a big, like, punch in the gut. I was
Mm-hmm.
very, very upset. Of course, the whole week was really tough. I might have been a little short with my mom a few times on the phone, because I was, she's like, why are you so worried about it? I'm like, because I know the statistics, like, I know. And so, yeah, the whole time during all of this, we're also holding yard sales to pay for the next round.
Mm-hmm.
Donated.
You got
So
to do
here,
what you got to do, right?
yeah, you got to do what you got to do. And which was great. Like, we were able to pay for all the meds and stuff with the next round. But
Mm-hmm.
so when day 6 came, because they don't call you on day 5, they call you on day 6. My
Okay.
clinic had nothing. And I missed the phone call. I was home. I was laying here, and my phone decided to, like, not ring.
Okay.
So
That's great.
I didn't get the call. I got a message like an hour later that we had nothing. So I didn't get to talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm. They just left you that news on a voicemail, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a tough call to get too, in
It is.
general, even if you talk to somebody, but just hearing it on a message too, it's just like, you must feel so just deflated.
Absolutely. I start crying. I think the nurse then, or one of the MAs, had called me shortly after that. And I was like, I missed the call. Maybe it's the next morning, to schedule my WTF appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was like, I'm sorry you didn't get to talk to anybody. So I had no clue what actually happened. So we talked to the doctor like literally the next week. And she said that they had died off at day 3.
Mm.
And I was concerned that it was an egg thing, but she had suggestions to make changes to my protocol, because we had done the human growth hormone and, the typical
Mm-hmm.
Menopur and follow stem. So this time she added not only the human growth hormone, which insurance doesn't pay for. So if anybody asks, they don't pay for that one of all the meds.
Yeah. Okay.
Added microdose Lupron to give me an antagonist protocol to get all of my follicles to grow evenly, because I
Uh-huh.
had 15 or so of them, or more, that just, and so many of them didn't happen.
Uh-huh.
So, which I called them on cycle day 1 in September, and they were like, oh, well, we're going to order up your meds. I had no clue that I was starting my cycle that
Oh,
week.
wow. Uh-huh.
Okay, let me just run over there and do all my things and figure out how to get my meds overnight from Optum. And this time I smartened up, because I didn't realize my copay was the same amount no matter how many needles or syringes worth or vials they sent me. So I'm like, I stemmed for 13 days last time. Please send me this many. So
Okay.
I paid like maybe $1,000 total, because I had to buy the Omnitrope
Got it. Okay.
for that cycle. that cycle, I had started out higher with follicles. I had 17. And by the time the retrieval day came, I had like 28, but again, they only got 15. And half of them again were mature. So I got 7, but all of them this time fertilized. So like his sperm were better this time. I don't know if it was the eggs that looked better, but they all, and then day 5 or 6 came again. And I got that call again that I had 0. Yeah, it was hard to hear that again. Like, I'm like, I had 7 chances and nothing. So at our follow-up appointment the following week, doctor said exactly what I thought. And I prepared my husband. I told Darrell, it's going to be time. She's going to tell us we need to move on. I had researched it already that was going to be the recommendation likely, because again, they died off at day 3. So growing. So it was time to consider donor egg or donor embryo. And we had contemplated doing donor embryo, but being that we're a mixed race, that was going to be absolutely almost impossible to find.
Okay.
It's like something within the Indian culture, it's very hard to find donors in the first place. And then I think they just don't know that you can also donate your embryos when you're done, those that do go through it.
Right.
And at that time, there were 2 at our clinic, because they do in-house donors and in-house embryo donation. There were 2 donor eggs or embryos, available that were Indian. Well, we wanted to have that mix so that we could, so that the child felt like it was part of both families.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So we talked about it, and then they were really quick about everything, got us into the genetic counselor and the psychologist that week. And so after he talked to both the psychologist and the genetic counselor, he understood why I was thinking more donor eggs. Like, it was going to be easier. We could have that mix that we want, but I still took the time. And by this time I had joined Rally. And of course the suggestion was from everybody was second opinion, but I had talked to my acupuncturist, who also is very close with Dr. Adams from Kind Body. And she's like, I'll tell you the same thing, because that was kind of who everybody suggested I go see. And she said from her days at the other clinic where I was at, she'd tell you the exact same thing. So we took the month. Essentially, Darrell didn't ask questions. He just kind of let me be. He waited for me to kind of say, I'm ready to look. Let's look.
Yeah.
Because he knew that it was my genetics we were losing, and he was allowing me to take that time.
Can we talk about the, grieving your genetics piece of it for you? Like, what was that process like for you, to go through that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I kind of had already been thinking about it, right, since April, because it was brought to our attention at that time. It was hard, though. Like, I feel like it was I'm letting people down, letting myself down, maybe letting my child down at first, that I couldn't do that for them. I couldn't give them those genetics. The turning point for me of just being completely okay with it, other than taking some courses, I met Maida Getman, and she has a course called the Donor Down Low, and that really helped. Was a conversation my mom and I had. And she was like, I don't care how you bring me a grandchild. I just want another grandchild. Because she was like, why are you crying? Because I was like bawling as we're talking about this. And it'd been like a week and a half or something. I said, because Mom, I have to give up my genetics. I don't get to pass down your blue eyes or, this or that. And she said, it's okay. You're going to love the child no matter what. But when you pick a donor, just make sure they're of Northern European descent. Like, that was all she cared about. Like, she just was like, I don't care. I just want another grandbaby to love. And so that helped. I, read up on epigenetics. I talked to the therapist more, and I just cried until I felt better. And slowly I started just kind of looking at donors, like passively looking to see what there was, filling out the information for ourselves. And then I'm like, okay, I think we can do this. I think it'll be okay. Like, it was hard, but my want for a child was higher than that need for the genetic relationship.
Yeah,
I
I'm fascinated by
work,
epigenetics. Let's talk about that for a minute. What did you learn
yeah.
about that? And for someone who's listening who might not know, how do you explain it?
So epigenetics it's really how the genes are expressed. And so that was a big deal to me because that meant my body gets to decide how that baby is develops, right? Like what color of eyes they're going to have or color of hair, what shape their nose will be, things like that. It doesn't mean it's me, but I still have that big role in development. And there's been lots of research out there that has shown that those from, well, one talks about like the potato famine, right? Of back in Ireland and in Denmark, and how those children decades later still have some deficits from that, or maybe even children from the Holocaust, right? And the malnutrition. So it's interesting that it can go that far in generations. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that was interesting to me that my family could still have some sort of control, right?
Right.
Or not even control, just influence on
Influence.
the child.
Yeah. I feel like in layman's terms, if as I understand it, and this is just another way to kind of, I guess, explain it and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like you've got the genes of the embryo, but then since the baby's growing inside of your body, your genes and your DNA have an effect on it as well.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. Like
I mean,
you're
that's like
the
a very, and
power
people
source.
listening, please, like I'm not a medical professional, as you guys well know. So look this all up, talk to your doctor, all that stuff. But that was my understanding of it, which is kind of cool. Like as the person who's growing the baby, you have an influence on the genetics as well.
I like to think of it kind of like the switchboards of the phones are right. You need that person way back when phones first started. Actually connect those calls.
Right.
That's
Okay.
like connecting those genes
Sure.
together.
That's cool.
Yeah. Or the company.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Tell me what happened next with you guys after that.
So I started kind of looking at profiles and after that and saved some. But, and I know you've heard me say this before, I felt like I had just signed up for Match.com, but also was trying to find a home in the
Mm-hmm.
marketplace, because as soon as I'd put one up there to review with him on the weekend, because he works swing shift, it'd be gone the next day. Like it was like, here I am reviewing all these ladies' profiles, checking out their photos, looking to see what their life is about and all of that, and trying to decide what values were important to me. And then I'd go look the next day because I knew that they released new ones at a certain time every day. And they just kept like popping off of there really quickly. There was
Okay.
a few that had stayed, and our donor was one that didn't just fly off the shelf. But I think because she's a first time donor, it was probably
Yeah.
what it was.
So you're talking about
Um,
your husband was working the swing shift, so you guys couldn't
yeah,
sync up in terms of deciding. So that's an interesting hurdle that you don't normally think of until you're in it, right? Like
yeah,
whoever would have thought that that would be one of the challenges, but that's
yeah.
legit.
Because his swing shift he's the manager, and so he doesn't let everybody leave until the work is done. So I'm like in bed and been in bed for hours when he gets home. So we had to wait until Saturday to start looking at him. And I'm like, dang it, that one's gone. Like, this is my top, but I can't just reserve it without showing him. And so we sat down and I had him review them. And I said, you need to just decide because these are the ones that I like. You tell me which one you're good with. And so he looked at him and then he looked at him again the next day, gave himself some time to think about it. And I said, okay, you have to push the button. Like I've done all the other legwork. You get to hit the reserve
Right. I remember
on
you
it.
telling me that. Mm-hmm.
And so he did. And we chose her because not only does she look like she could be a family member, but she's had a lot of the same core values that I have in life.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thing was that she was big into special education. And we have quite a few nephews that have either autism, ADHD, developmental delays of some sort. And that was a big deal to us. Even though that doesn't matter in the makeup of our child, it meant something to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then
That
she
makes
had
sense.
almost a completely perfect health history. Like that
Okay.
was her health was completely null and void of pretty much anything. But her grandmother had had breast cancer as a young adult. So our clinic had already tested her for BRCA and all of that. So we knew that would be okay. And we asked the genetic counselor, like, what is the risk? Because we met with her afterwards, and she's like, she has the same risk, or your child would have the same risk as you will have, because you don't have a history of it in your family. So, and that was good to know. That was reassuring.
Right. Okay. So that must have felt good to have that piece of the puzzle kind of figured out, right?
Absolutely. It was like, you have so many days to decide once you've reserved it, but just to know and think about, well, gosh, we've done it. We've picked the other half of this child, like, was such a big deal. Like, that we could just kind of breathe and relax and get through the rest of the winter. Yeah.
Okay. So what was the plan in terms of treatment at that point?
The plan was that I would just hang out and wait, because we were going to do a frozen embryo transfer no matter what. So she actually was in right away to get her baseline, like within a week or so, to do a baseline to just kind of see where things were at, see where she was in her cycle, and get her on birth control. She's a teacher and has 2 young children. So what are they now? Probably 7 and 4, because it's been 2 years.
Okay.
And so that was a big deal to us too, because she had been a first-time donor, but she had had a child recently. So we knew she had some kind of good fertility. So she chose to wait until after the holidays, which is fine. Like, I get it. I didn't want you to have to deal with all those meds during the holidays anyway.
Right.
So January, after she had her cycle, she started her stims. And the funny part is she had started the stims the day I decided to finally get in for a saline sonogram. Like, we were both at the clinic at some point in time.
Right. That's funny.
Doing all our things. Just missed each other. So yeah. Yeah. So January, she started her stims, and it was January 28th, I believe, that she actually did the retrieval. It was really hard, because you're letting go of a lot of control with that somebody else is doing those meds, making sure that they're doing them right. The clinic at first wasn't giving me the numbers. After each appointment, I would be like, I need to know how many follicles there were, what the sizes were. And they're like, well, most intended parents don't care. And I'm like, I think that's because you work with a lot of men, same-sex couples, men that don't understand.
Yeah.
Like,
you're like, most intended parents aren't me.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I need those numbers to really know things are going well. And so finally they started giving me the numbers. And then I worried, because the trigger was so late at night. It was like midnight. And I'm like, no, what if she doesn't do it right?
Right. Where she falls asleep. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, myself, I have an alarm for every med that's due, right? And my nurse knew that. So she called me the next morning, and she's like, I knew you were going to ask this. So I want you to know, we had her come in for progesterone level, and she did do it at the right time. She knew I would be freaking out, because my anxiety was so high. Because you're not doing anything. You're just sitting back, and you're like, okay, husband, go drop off your sample.
Exactly.
But my doctor had him drop it off early, because it was so high with COVID in the area. The rates of spread was really high. So we already had the frozen sperm at the clinic. So we didn't even have to worry about that for the transfer or the retrieval. So, but she turned out to be a pretty good donor, because we ended up with 21 eggs. That attrition rate, of course, fell down. We had 17 matured and fertilized. And to send off to PGT testing, which was the first time ever that we got to do that, we had 10. Okay. And they were all 5AA. Like, there was no need to be like, well, I want to transfer this one because of its grading, when it came to grading. So we came back with 8, which was wonderful. And I remember Sonia saying, what are you trying to make a baseball team? I was like, no.
Like, now you're just being greedy.
Exactly. But at that point in time, after we talked to the doctor to prep for our transfer, I was like, so how long between, because I'm like, now we have all these options. How long between babies would you make us wait? She goes, well, we transfer up to age 55. I said, that's not what I want to know. I don't need to have a baby at 55. And she was like, well, a year, you need to be done breastfeeding and all this stuff. So I was like, okay. So it was weird to be in that new space of heading into transfers after all this failure, because you're so used to failure to have all these good numbers. So March, because my body does well and I get cycles, and my lining grows well, we decided to do a natural cycle. No, sorry, March we did a medicated cycle. We tried that and I ovulated through the medications. So that was tough. So we had one canceled cycle only a few days in. Like, I'm like, great. So converted everything to cyst management because I had like a size 30 cyst on my ovary.
Okay.
And let that kind of do its thing and go away. So April, doctor was like, well, why don't we just try natural? Because your body does what it's supposed to do. You build your lining. Your lab values are always really good. And I was like, okay. And I know I ovulate later. And they wanted me to start testing the average, right? 9 days, day 9 of the cycle. I'm like, you guys are making me waste a lot of money on these stupid ovulation tests. Like, I'm not going to ovulate until like day 17. And I was right. It was way out there. And so we did that transfer April 19th of 2022. Everybody was super excited that we finally got to that point. We've been very open with most everything. So everybody was asking, when is it time to check? When is it time to check your pregnancy? My mom was so excited. Like, she was super excited. She didn't understand the process, but she was so excited. So she would call me like every other day to see if I felt pregnant yet.
Right.
And I was getting a little annoyed and snippy with her a couple times because I'm like, Mom, did you feel pregnant at 2.5 weeks?
Exactly. Coming from a good place, right? But you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
It's like adding to the stress and the pressure and, all that.
Exactly. And I'm like, no, Mom, I don't notice anything, especially because I wasn't on all the hormones where you get those symptoms, right? And so Saturday or Sunday, she was like, I'll call you back. She had to go to the bathroom or whatever when we were in the middle conversation. She's like, I'll call you back after I get back from the store. She didn't call me back, but she had been calling me so frequently when I got a call that Tuesday. So 1 week after, and I'd just gone back to work. That was my first day back because I took extra days to really just kind of milk it. The phone kept ringing in the evening. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So I answered it and it was my dad. And my dad doesn't usually just call me. Now he does. But at that point, that late in the day, he usually calls me when I'm at work because he's at work in the truck, bored because he drives the truck.
Right.
And I was like, what's going on? And he just kept saying, I need you to come here. I need you to come here now. And they live an hour away. I need you to come here. And I'm like, no, what's the matter? Like, it's 7:00, almost 7:00 at night. You're asking me to come up there that quickly. Even when my mom is sick, you don't ask me just to come up there. I hear from somebody else she's been in the hospital. And so I guess we didn't talk about how they both had been diagnosed with colon cancer 2 months apart from each other. But finally he gave in. Like, I was walking down the hall to my bedroom to put clothes on because I was already in my pajamas. And he's like, your mom passed away. I came home and she was gone. And it literally, in the movies when they just drop to the floor and start screaming, that was me. And Roscoe, my big Great Dane, came running down the hall to check on me. I just was shaking, screaming. Finally got a hold of my husband and my nephew. They worked together at the time because there's no way I could have drove. If I had driven up there and not had my Darrell with me, I would have lost it worse.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
I wouldn't have been able to drive home, right? Like, I was cramping, and I had been feeling cramped, so I was hoping it was the implantation. I was worried that then I had dropped to the floor and I hurt hurt all of that. It was terrible.
I'm so sorry, babe. And as you know, I recently lost my mom, so we've been bonding over this, and we actually did, a rally one-off group, like a subgroup support group for people that have lost their parents, and it was so cathartic for me. And you and I coordinated that together. So thank you for being there for me. And,
Yes.
my
Thank
heart
you.
goes out to you. You guys have really helped me navigate this time. And I know how hard it's been for you as well.
It's really hard. And I'm always here for anybody because it's like I didn't ever think I would lose my parent that young. And I always thought about that when my cousin, it's actually my mom's cousin, but we're the same age. She lost her dad when we turned after we turned 30.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, I was like, I couldn't imagine not having my parent at that age.
Mm-hmm.
And then here it is, 14 years later or 13 years later, or whatever. And I lose my mom, like just suddenly, unexpectedly. She had COVID a few months prior. So I think with her heart disease, maybe she just couldn't take it. Like she didn't recover well from it or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So that Thursday was beta day. And I got the call that it was negative and from the doctor. And she didn't know at that point in time that my mom had passed away. And so I was like, because the nurse had already called me with the beta, but the doctor called and I was like, I'm not great. It's been really bad. I'm like, and then I told her and she really wanted me to take a break. She was like, I want you to take a break, get through all of this. And I understand why, but I was like, my mom wouldn't want me to.
Yes.
My mom would be so mad at me if I took a break. And so she's like, well, what about doing a medicated cycle next time? And I agreed. And so we did all the things to get prepped for that, to start our medicated cycle in May, doing Lupron again. Wonderful microdose Lupron. And Darrell came up with the idea because my mom was a huge Disney fan, to take me for my first birthday without her to Disneyland. So here I am. And I know you've seen all the videos and the posts of me doing my shots in the middle of Disneyland.
I love that story that we always ask, what's the weirdest place you've given yourself a shot? And you hands down have the best answer, that you did it at Disney.
Yeah, I did one sitting next to the churro thing by the Matterhorn. But then one of my friends through donor conception, she came up for my birthday and she did her first ever PIO injection for me in the middle of the bathroom at Galaxy's Edge. And all you can hear in the video is the toilets flushing.
Oh my God. It's brilliant.
So June 16th, which was Tupac's birthday. So we made everybody laugh at the clinic, come all dressed up in our Tupac gear.
Oh God.
And the doctor, even my nurse was like, she's going to love it. So she's like, well, what do you have a song request? So we asked her to play Mama, right? Like, why not? That's what we're trying to become here. And that one stuck finally. That was wonderful. But at week 5, I think 5 weeks, 4 days, I started bleeding. I had an SCH because I went in the next day, even though I know bleeding can be normal. And we went in and checked it, and they were concerned that it was already, there was a sac and there was a pole, but it was already measuring behind. So of course they had me go on another week and continue the meds. And it was even worse. So my beta had completely pretty much dropped to 0 by that time. And so by week 8, they had finally said, just stop all your meds and let's let it go naturally. So 8 weeks, 3 days or something, I miscarried our first one. And that was my first pregnancy ever that I know of, right? There could have been other.
Yeah.
That's so early. So we took some time. I decided to see a naturopath who at 44 diagnosed me with PCOS. Nobody else ever has. And you heard my history.
That's wild that it had never come up before.
I know, right? Never. And I mean, I had ruptured cysts quite a bit as a teenager. So found out I also had some thyroid issues. So we went on that, hoping that would help a little bit too. And so it was by the time we did our WTF appointment and they could get me back on the calendar, it was middle of October. So we started stems again, kind of towards the end of October, early part of November for a transfer after Thanksgiving. So last November, the 29th, we transferred another girl because my mom had these dreams of a girl, dark skinned with curly hair.
Yeah.
And my husband and I both have curly hair. So we were trying so hard for a girl. For her, that's all we had transferred. This one stuck again. Numbers were better because my betas were kind of low, but okay. But my numbers again weren't very high. Like I think I was barely above 50, like 56 or something. And again, at week 5, I think day 6 this time, because I started stressing at week 5 period that I was going to bleed. I started having bleeding again and went back in, and this time they did a beta because they did not do a beta in the first pregnancy at that appointment. So they did a beta this time, and my beta was only 800, and I was, almost 6 weeks, and they were very concerned. And I'm like, I'm concerned too, because doctor's like, I'm concerned. I've said, so am I. And that was just before Christmas. My first Christmas without my mom. I wasn't wanting to do anything in the first place, but I was going to suck it up and go to my dad's. And then that happened, and I just called my dad and I was like, I can't. I think we're going to end up miscarrying. And we went in on the 27th for another ultrasound, and it wasn't any better. Like there was a sac. It was almost like it was a blighted ovum. But they think it was just a blood clot, since I was bleeding. And at that point, my beta was like 29. So I had really drastically dropped. So that night I took the meso, which wasn't great. It's not fun to take that, but at least I live in a state where you can do that.
That's right.
Right. Because my first beta, which was also Sonia's first beta, right, was on the day that Roe versus Wade was overturned. And so had to worry about that with this one.
And tell everybody what state you're in.
I'm in Washington.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a safe state. They have said they're safe for everybody to come to with me too. So December, we miscarried again. And this time it was time because we had lost 2 and had 1 failed transfer. Doctor went ahead and started doing RPL testing because a lot of times they won't until it's 3 losses. And everything came back negative, which I thought maybe I would have APS because my grandmother has it, but I didn't. And so then she did a hysteroscopy in office, which meant no sedation. And my cervix was not being cooperative. It was the worst experience. I'm so glad I brought Darrell with me. But she found that my uterus was full of small polyps. Mind you, I had multiple saline sonograms and they'd never seen these. They must have just been small enough.
Right.
That you couldn't see it on that type of a visualization. So now I had to wait to get into my OB. That was February. I had to wait to get into my OB/GYN office to even get scheduled for one. And I just called him at one point, and because my OB is so popular and she was booked out to April, I said, I will take anybody and I don't need to be seen in the office beforehand. Let's just do this. So March, we went in the 22nd. So 3 months later, and finally got all those polyps removed. And my uterine lining was great and everything looked beautiful. Nice, fresh uterus. So April 20th, April of last year, we did, we prepped for Emma Alice Receptiva and ERA. So another cycle of meds without any results, right? Like you're not getting a transfer this time, a mock cycle. So we did that at the end of April, and it took, and let me tell you, Receptiva was great because I was like, how do you use this code? We've got this code. And you know how it is to call customer service. It's like terrible for most places. Receptiva, they picked up right away. They're like, oh, just put it on the paperwork, anywhere. It's fine. We will make sure it gets transferred. And so we did that. And the MA was like, I didn't know there was a code. I'm like, here, keep it. Use it for all your patients.
Totally.
I'm like, save them a few dollars. It's not a lot, but it's something.
Right. It's still valid too.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, they do a new one every year.
Yes, exactly.
So we did that. And for some reason, it took the full 6 weeks to get all my results back. Usually, like I was hearing lots of people at that point in time were getting them back at like 3 weeks. Mine took the full 6 weeks. So got the results back. My Emma and my Alice were negative. My ERA, of course, I'm on the wrong side of the statistics, was inconclusive because there wasn't enough data, they said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what? I don't want to go through another cycle for that. But I did come back positive on the BCL6.
Okay.
So
that's the Receptiva results, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, and I know you know this, but some others might not know, but the BCL6 shows for inflammation, which can be markers for endometriosis or other inflammatory processes in the uterus. And I kind of told doctor I wasn't surprised because prior to cycles, I normally get a really strong low back pain. And my periods are quite uncomfortable, but they're short. Like they're pretty painful. But they're only a couple days. So we opted not to do a lap or anything like that. That's just going to push us out further to see what it was. She's like, we can do the ERA again if you want, but you've been getting implantation. So let's just move forward. And the treatment for the positive BCL6 is Lupron, the Lupron depot. And I dreaded that because I know other people have taken it. Right. And I've watched how my grandfather responded to it when he had prostate cancer. So I had been laid off right about that same time from the hospital. They eliminated my position. I was upset about that and was worried that we wouldn't be able to continue our treatments. But it was a godsend because I wasn't working through those side effects and symptoms of the Lupron.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The 2 months of menopause.
Right.
So, yeah, I was glad to be able to do that at home. And again, insurance paid for most of that. So that was another thing people really have to check.
Wait, can I just say you have been through a lot in the last couple of years? My God,
it's a lot in the last couple of years. You're right. How I'm not like super crazy, I don't know.
Yeah.
So finally, we got the go ahead to start another transfer cycle in August of this year, and so we did another medicated one. I advocated for myself because every time I've done PIO, they have had to increase the dosing with my second dose. They're like, "Did you even take it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I did." So this time I said, "Can we start at 1.5 and see if that helps my progesterone level?" And it did. I was like at like 15 or 16 on the next day instead of like 4 or 8. Like it was barely bumping. So 9 months to the day, we transferred our next embryo. And this time we asked them to just pick whatever they wanted. It didn't matter. We were down to just 3 boys and 2 girls. We just wanted to get one. And I didn't want to waste another girl if it didn't work, right? Like all this work, what if it didn't work again? And then we waste another girl because we're trying to help my mom.
Right.
Trying to live out my mom's dream.
Yeah.
And so it was actually a nice, relaxing day. And Darrell, he's so sweet. This whole time he was like understanding why I didn't clean the house more and do other things around the house while I was on the Lupron. He took a photo of myself and him and my mom on our last vacation, our last cruise together, to his coworker who does these pencil line drawings. And she drew this beautiful photo of the 3 of us from our last, like one of our last elegant nights on the cruise ship. And he gave it to me just before we went to the clinic. So yeah, so I took my days of.
I love that.
Yeah, he's so sweet. I took my days of bed rest at this point in time. I had been watching my friend, Kate, her twins. So then I went and played with them, and I just thought, oh, maybe their little hormones, like all the hormones from hugging them, will help too. So I just kept making sure I was with them. I started work 2 days after I got my first beta back, so I started back to work at the same time, learning that it worked.
Oh my God.
I know, right? And I had symptoms from day 2 this time. Like my hot flashes were back right away. The crazy dreams came back really quick. The cramping, the increased smell, everything was really quick. But this time I had extreme heartburn. Like it was terrible early. So our first beta was 122, which was way better than any of them we've ever had, more than double the last one.
Wait, don't they say that if the baby has a lot of curly dark hair, you have heartburn?
Well, I think that's further along in the pregnancy.
You never know.
I know, right? The second beta, which was my first day of work, was, gosh, what was it? It was 416, I think it was. And then our last one, I had them do a third one, was over 1,000, and I'd never seen one over 1,000. So that
Oh my God. How did that feel?
It felt good. Still, of course, the whole pregnancy after loss is hard. And Darrell wouldn't let me do anything. He's like, I'll clean the house. You don't need to pick up anything, this and that, because he was so afraid that I would lose the baby again.
Yes, of course. Well, I just wanted to ask if we could touch on, quickly, just the anxiety of pregnancy after loss and infertility and your experience with that.
Every time I go to the bathroom, I'm checking, right? I'm checking the toilet paper. I did have one episode, and of course, it was around that 5-week mark, near 6 weeks, where I had an episode of spotting. But I had my nails were a little longer, and I was doing the vaginal progesterone, and because of my history, they wouldn't let me use the applicators, and so it was one time only. I didn't have any more bleeding, but of course, immediately I sent a message to my nurse, even though it was late at night, and I was like, I had blood, this and that. And then the next morning she messaged me back, and I'm like, it was one time, hasn't happened again. She's like, just put your feet up, as we all already know to do if we're bleeding, we put our feet up, we get our water, and we lay down. And so, but every time, and any time that I don't feel a symptom, I freak out. Like if I have a night where I don't have a bunch of crazy dreams, I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? Or at first my breast hurt so bad, and now they don't. It's more my nipples. And before getting those ultrasounds, you're like, oh God, does it mean it's not working? All of that. So every single time, it just freaks me out. And now I've felt a few flutters here and there. And when I don't, I'm like, oh God.
Right. And we were talking about the Doppler before we started recording. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I've had a few ultrasounds and everything's been good. Baby's heart rate is all good. And we've had our nuchal translucency test, and that looked all great. Yeah, I got one of my friends gave me a Doppler, just the home one, and they're not all rated for every body style. Like you have to make sure, and she's a lot slimmer than I am. And so I went to use it last night, and I at first couldn't hear anything. I'm like, oh God, what's going on? I was messing with it. And then I was reading online about it more detail, like instructions of how to find the Doppler or the heart rate. And it says, well, if you are overweight, you need a different megahertz and to get a better reading. And so it's like, now I'm in my head, of course, all day. But it's like, I'm not going to call the doctor because I heard it, but it wasn't picking up the actual, like what the rate was. Right. And I'm like, it's because I didn't have the right, like gel, and I didn't have this and not the right probe. I'm trying to rationalize it all. And it's just like, it'd be nice if I could just have a ultrasound machine where I could just see the baby when I want to. And really I can. Really I could, because in the department I work in at the hospital or at the clinic, we have ultrasound techs. They do a lot of like vascular stuff, and they would totally look at it. And one of them is a fertility patient. And so I just haven't them because I'm afraid.
Yeah. We joke on our rally calls about how we want the rally clinic, and how we would be like, you can get ultrasounds every single day. Just come on in. Everybody who's, pregnant after infertility or loss, just giving them that peace of mind.
Absolutely. And I could do that. Right. But then I'm also afraid of what if they find nothing, and then I have to go downstairs to my OB's office and be like, well, we were playing around with the ultrasound machine.
Right. It's scary. It's so scary.
Yeah.
Tell me about, not to float our own boat from Rally, but you did join a couple of years ago, and you've been such a big part of the community. Can you tell people who might not know, what's your experience been like, just having this community of people that get it, that that are there for you when you're going through all this stuff?
It's been a big help, like to have that community, have those people that get it, because you can't talk to just anybody that hasn't been through any kind of treatment whatsoever, or even a miscarriage, right? Like they don't know what you feel. And then you get those unsolicited advices, and that, you don't ask for, like at least, you can get pregnant or just adopt or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But going and having these group of women like on Rally, you don't hear that.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's more empathetic, and the girls and the ladies, all of you guys have been there for me for all of these ups and downs. I mean, to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody like when my mom died, right? Like
Yeah.
I called Sonia and just started
Mm-hmm.
bawling about it. And, she talked to me for, I don't even know how long. She was on her way to work. So forever, and kept checking on me and freaked out when I didn't answer the phone on Thursday, the next, 2 days later, and was like finding Darrell on Facebook to make sure I was okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or, my last miscarriage, everybody rallied together to like get us gift cards to dinner and massage and, just things to make me feel better. And we do that for everybody that we can, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we all try to rally together for that.
Yeah. Well, you've
And
been
to find
so,
other
yeah.
people who've gone through the loss of a parent while going through this, because there's
Mm-hmm.
so many of us in the community that just nobody knew about.
I know.
Has
That was really like I said at the top of the call, that was such a great get together for me and for all of us. I think it was really, really just another way to bond and just, we didn't have to say anything. It was like, I get it. I see you. I went through
yeah.
it too.
And now
Um,
anytime I go pretty much anywhere in the country, there's somebody I can go talk
I
to.
know. Well, we always joke that you're like the social chair because you're always getting together with people. You're so social and you're such a connector. And I love that about you. Well, before we wrap, because we have like 3 minutes now before
Yeah.
this one runs out. Tell me, Melissa, about, just how you're feeling today, where you're at exactly, and then just final words, just for anybody who might be listening who's kind of still in the thick of it.
Well, I still am super hopeful for this pregnancy, and we have found out gender. I'm just not revealing yet, but also that you persevere, right? You just got to keep going. If you want it, it can happen. I didn't feel like it could, but I'm here. I am due in May, and it's
Mm-hmm.
crazy that we finally made it to that point. And I just say everybody should keep going if that's what they can do. Like obviously there's finances and other things, mental hardships that come up too. So yeah, that's what I would say.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. And thanks again to Melissa Nath for sharing her story. Guys, if you want to join our Fertility Rally family, we are open every day of the year now. So check us out. We actually also have a really great special through the end of the year. It's $149 for our annual membership through the end of 2023. And the reason we're doing that is just because it's a holiday special. We really want to have as many people getting the support they need as possible. Our rally fam is, hundreds strong, but we are always welcoming more people no matter what you're going through. So if you want to join, go to fertilityrally.com. You can go to the link in our bio on Instagram at Fertility Rally or my Infertile Life Stories Instagram. You can always reach out to me with questions, but just to give you a quick overview, we do 6 to 7 support groups a week. We have 3 different private Facebook groups. We've got a website full of content and videos and a lot of our past Rally Live videos that you can watch as a member and so much more. We also do IRL events. We did an amazing one this past summer in Chicago, and we do virtual events too. So check us out. This is the Worst Club with the best members, and we all get it. You are definitely going to find somebody to connect to. We welcome you with open arms. So check out Fertility Rally. And thanks again to Melissa.